working on something called Node Nation, so that every Salvadoran household has a Bitcoin node and they have all the money. The state has no money. The state just does your bidding. So if you need a new airport, the node owners and the Bitcoin owners who own the state's money would decide whether or not to build that airport. Not the state doesn't have any money. The state is bankrupt, as it should be. The state should not have any money. They should not control the money. So that's my goal here, as I've expressed to the president many times. And I think that's where we're headed. And I think that's the future.
While individuals speculating on altcoins may pursue rapid financial rewards, and those seeking refuge might opt for stablecoins, both categories, according to Max Keiser, are ultimately unsuccessful. He asserts that Bitcoin consistently draws monetary value away from the entire cryptocurrency sector. Keiser, a staunch advocate for Bitcoin, argues this continuous transfer of value is likely to ignite the subsequent major price surge, potentially propelling the cryptocurrency's value to an astonishing $2 million. Bitcoin has evolved significantly past its initial phase of technological experimentation. Global adoption is accelerating as companies, institutional treasuries, and even national governments begin to accumulate Bitcoin. Currently, businesses alone possess approximately 3.4% to 4% of the total supply, generating a level of demand that surpasses the capabilities of traditional currencies. The availability of Bitcoin is quickly diminishing. Since long-term holders possess a greater quantity of the cryptocurrency than is being newly created through mining, there are fewer Bitcoins accessible on the open market. Concurrently, continuous governmental money printing and the relentless erosion of value through fiat inflation are diminishing trust in established financial frameworks, consequently pushing more capital toward Bitcoin's appeal as a fixed supply alternative. Keiser maintains that all other digital currencies, from lesser-known Blake coins to the enthusiasm surrounding altcoins, represent mere distraction. The genuine narrative lies in the irreversible progression of Bitcoin's widespread integration and its pronounced scarcity. He concludes that the final objective is not simply an additional market rally, but rather a global reappraisal of money itself, with Bitcoin at the forefront, spearheading the way to the $2 million valuation. View the entire video to hear Keiser's comprehensive explanation of why all momentary market shifts eventually dissipate and how Bitcoin's definitive phase possesses the capacity to fundamentally restructure global wealth on an unprecedented scale.
Is that you have the node owners who kind of run the world, and then they congregate in different groupings or tribes. And they come and they go, and it's like murmurations of starlings in the sky. You know, they come together and you see these huge murmurations where starlings are flying in synchronization, and it looks fantastic. And then they disappear, right? And I think that's the future for Bitcoiners, that they come together for a few years or a few weeks or a few hours, and then they fly away and they create other groups, and they're totally mobile. They're totally free, because Bitcoin as perfect money means that we are living the dream hidden in our collective unconscious. And ultimately, my Bitcoin or your Bitcoin or my Bitcoin. And we're in actually a post-money world where just our love is the guiding principle of our existence as humans on planet Earth. And that's made possible by Bitcoin. New York Stock Exchange, love is not currently trading anywhere except with Bitcoin. The price of love, you could say, is worth 2 point something trillion. That's the Bitcoin is love. And if you look at the stock exchange, it's dominated by pharmaceuticals, insurance companies, banks, defense contractors. They're all based on fear and hate. And so they have
the
media,
very much.
right? So all of these, I would say, gambling, casinos. So, 99% of everything that's traded on exchanges around the world is fear-based and hate-based. And so Bitcoin comes around and it pushes that out of the way, and it's more love. Incredibly smart man. I would say he's a genius, and he listens. And that's he listened about Bitcoin. He knew about Bitcoin before he became president in 2019. He had talked about it, I believe, in 2016. And he talked about making Bitcoin legal tender back in those early days when he was mayor of San Salvador. And so we are definitely on a Bitcoin wavelength. And so, and my role here is to kind of push the envelope a little bit, and where Stacy, she runs the Bitcoin office, and she's actually in the day-to-day kind of role of facilitating and enabling the country to become more orange pilled or Bitcoinized and dealing with government. And for that, you need diplomatic skills, of which I have none. So, I don't. So I'm more of thinking longer term, bigger picture, theoretical stuff. And so a lot of the stuff I come up with is dismissed immediately. Like I suggested, they cut the national anthem in half because it's the longest national anthem in the world. It takes over 4 minutes to sing. And by the time it's all over, you could have increased GDP by 2 or 3% in how much time you spend singing the national anthem. Just cut it in half. The whole song is actually repeated. It's just the same song repeated twice. Just play it once. You don't need to play it twice. So that kind of suggestion is immediately dismissed. Also, when you go into any restaurant, all the cutlery is wrapped in these little paper napkins that take like 5 minutes to unwrap. And by the time you do, the paper napkin is shredded. Okay, that's totally GDP destroying, productivity destroying. Don't.
According to Max Keiser, Bitcoin functions as a financial black hole, drawing money from across the globe. He emphasizes that it is not a speculative gamble. With global Bitcoin ETFs now managing assets exceeding $179.5 billion, institutional adoption is accelerating faster than ever before. The majority of this expansion is driven by U.S. funds, while corporate treasuries are simultaneously accumulating Bitcoin at a rapid pace, pushing institutional holdings to approximately 1.86 million BTC, marking a rise of over 50% within a single year. On the supply side, pressure continues to mount. Bitcoin's liquid supply is diminishing due to having events that curb new issuance, alongside an increasing number of coins being locked away by long-term holders. This tightening effect means that fewer Bitcoins are circulating in the market, amplifying scarcity precisely when demand is surging. Keiser asserts that these converging factors, surging institutional demand, shrinking supply, and Bitcoin's unmatched scarcity, collectively indicate that the asset is primed for a major revaluation. In his view, Bitcoin is on the verge of breaking all previous price records and achieving an unprecedented peak of $2 million per coin.
For the IMF, because they're a dying institution and they won't be around five years from now. And as you can see, the country's strategic Bitcoin reserve is added to every day. It's going to be worth $1 billion soon. It'll be worth 3, 4, or 5 billion, and use those funds as collateral to just retire the IMF debt from the balance sheet of the country. I think the president shrewdly took the 3% money now, knowing that the IMF will be gone 36 months or so. They just won't exist anymore. Bitcoin will have eviscerated the IMF. It's like having a special needs child around with the IMF. It's like you can't just throw them off a cliff. You kind of like say, okay, well, we'll just bear through this. And so my approach would be, I think, more cruel. Because the IMF has a reputation for coming down to these countries and throwing leaders out of Bitcoin is at odds with what every other institution in the world is saying. The IMF says that Bitcoin is adding instability in the country, whereas Donald Trump is saying we need Bitcoin to add stability. The IMF is saying, oh, it's stoking inflation, where Donald Trump will say, well, we need Bitcoin to control inflation. So in the U.S. Is the biggest contributor to the IMF, or the second biggest contributor to the IMF. So at some point, they're just going to pull the plug on the IMF because they're stupid. And so that was the kind of a template for a speculative attack. Borrow money from the system cheap, because they're keeping it artificially cheap because they're unwilling to deal with inflation in a realistic way, and then use it to aggressively short sell everything to the point where they have to force them to make an adjustment. And then the difference, on the British pound, he pocketed $1 billion. So with Michael Saylor and the clones of Strategy are engaged in a massive global speculative attack against the dollar principally, but all fiat money, and they are succeeding to do so. And it's good. They're getting rid of the fiat money world. They're accelerating the collapse of central banks. They're accelerating the collapse of states. But they are putting Bitcoin into the hands of, getting away from the purest custody form of Bitcoin, and you're custodying your Bitcoin outside of
Hmm.
self custody. So there's risks involved. So I just like to remind people that there is a risk when you are backing Michael Saylor or these other the clones of Michael Saylor, because you in a risk that you don't have to, right? The beauty of Bitcoin is that you don't need a custody outside of yourself. You can self custody, and that's the purest form of hodling Bitcoin, which is the primary use case of Bitcoin, is to separate money from state. That's the number one, the love. But you come for the greed. So I mean, it's I say, Bitcoin was sent by God to unfuck our money, and I think God is unhappy with humans because we're destroying His creation. He sent His Son. We killed him. So He's thinking, okay, I'll give him one more chance. He sent us Bitcoin. And so this is our last chance. And so he took the thing that we were very susceptible towards self annihilation, greed, and he converted it into love with Bitcoin. Because the greedier you are, the more it pushes out the fiat money hate. So it's a trick. It's a trick that God is playing on us to bail out the banks. Because as we just saw with the $5 trillion big, beautiful bill, he still works for the Wall Street bankers to keep the fiat money Ponzi scheme going. So he's no different in that regard. And the whole function of the central bank is to